Hello, hello, guys. In today's episode, I interview Andrew Stevens, and he shares his really interesting story about how he discovered hiking inside his life, how he set his targets and his sights on the John Muir Trail, and how he lost over 100 pounds in the process of his preparation and his lead up to this particular adventure. Now, inside this episode, we go through sort of the mindset that he took to go through this process, the steps he took to get started and to get him through the trail, and his best tips for success. So I hope you enjoy the episode, and let's get into it. Hey, my name is Rowan Smith, and I want to welcome you to the Training for Trekking podcast. Now, this is the world's very first podcast, which is entirely dedicated to helping you train, prepare, and conquer your upcoming hike, trek, or mountain adventure. So once a week, I'm going to be giving you quality and practical information on the subjects of physical preparation for trekking, dealing with altitude, and nutrition on the trail, so you can know everything you need to be doing to have the best chance of a safe, enjoyable, and successful adventure. So now you know what you're in for. Let's get into today's episode. Okay, so welcome, Andrew. Very excited to have you on the show, mate.
I'm excited to be on the show. Thanks for having me.
So, this is going to be a really interesting episode today because you got a really very interesting story to talk through, and I think we're going to have some really cool tips.
Hopefully
to
interesting.
Share. Yeah, hopefully interesting. Yeah, well, we'll
I
soon
think
find
it is,
out.
but you may be bored by it. So.
No, I don't think that'll be in doubt. So I think we'll be all good on that front.
Great.
But as we were chatting before we jumped in, kind of you were saying that your story was it's really interesting in the sense that you went from almost a casual hiker to a casual camper to really attacking a super long through hike and going through a whole bunch of different things in between. So it'll be really interesting to just chat through that. And, I know a lot of listeners are in a similar situation and are sort of aspiring for similar things. So yeah, I'm absolutely pumped to get into this. So I think to kick things off, do you just want to tell us, a little bit about yourself, who you are, where you're from, and, what do you do?
Totally. So right now today, as I'm talking with you, I am in my apartment in Los Angeles, California. And for most of my life, I've lived sort of in the Southern California area. And I think as it pertains to sort of hiking and camping, it was something that I grew up with, lucky enough to live close to a lot of really great camping in California here in America. And that was something my family did as like our go-to vacation. And growing up, I think hiking was something I pushed against a little bit more than I embrace today. I was definitely like the chubby kid who liked to make things out of Lego or do arts and crafts, where the rest of my family were the athletes and the physical people. So whether it was a rebellion or just an instinct, we butted heads a little bit there. But later in life, sort of returned to a love of outdoor activities, but sort of found myself frustrated because I would have these ambitions of doing some of these longer or more challenging physical things, and really sort of felt where I was at on my physical journey was preventing me from doing some of that.
Tell us a bit more about that. Like, at that stage, as you started getting into these types of, physical things, and you had other aspirations, like what were you kind of wanting to do at that stage, and where were you starting?
So my girlfriend and I, like, we would go camping from time to time, just sort of car camping. And, I guess to friends or family who have RVs and tow camper trailers, we were considered hardcore or more rugged, but, we sort of saw the thru hikers and the backpackers and sort of romantically aspired to that. But yeah, it was the type of thing where, like, I'm a big, I love like trying to check off all the national parks here in the US. And, there's a lot of really beautiful stuff you can see from the paved sections and the parking lots, and even the short trails. But after like a 5 mile trail, it was just really hard, to be blunt. Like I was closing in on 400 pounds and you get sort of the condescending. I think people are in the right place, but they're sort of cheering you on as you pass some of the people on the hike, like, way to go. I can't believe you're out this far. And it's not even that long of a hike. But it was fun and it was beautiful. And I loved getting to see sort of the world this way. But again, anything after like a 5 mile day hike, it was like, I just, as my ambitions grew, what I could do, I felt like I was pretty limited. And so, in about the end of 2018, I sort of had a moment where I was like, this is I'm going to need a change. And, I live in LA and I sort of work in the quote unquote entertainment industry. Like I make podcasts, I work on some live events and all that sort of stuff. And, there's a thing we talk about when we're writing a story called an inciting incident. And it's like, the analogy is it's the part of the story where like a character throws their hat over the fence and they're sort of forced now to go over the fence to get their hat. And so I was, just because I'm used to sort of thinking in terms of like storytelling, I looked at my life and was like, is this the story that I want to be living? And so I came up with this idea to plan a month-long backpacking trip through the Sierra Nevadas, do the John Muir Trail, and sort of started telling everyone I could think of as like creating my own inciting incident. Like, hey, this is a thing I'm going to do. I'm going to spend a year getting in shape. I'm going to train it, and I want everyone to keep me accountable. I want shame to help be a weird sort of backwards motivator to get me out there. And it worked. I lost about 100 pounds, and a year later, I ended up hiking, over 200 miles through the Sierra Nevadas.
All right. So let's
Is that too much information? Am I just like vomiting all this ass?
I love that. And I love that inciting incident as well, in the fact that, as a coach, we often talk about, not so much in those words, but it's very, very similar to the storytelling. When people do look to make a significant change, there is always that inciting incident. There's something that triggers it, and there's always something. As a coach, our sort of job is to try to identify that, and so we can understand, the journey people are going on. And it's really interesting hearing you talk about that from a, storytelling perspective, and also, your own perspective there. So, very interesting.
Yeah,
so
my friend Monty, he does he's a storyteller too, and he also works. He's like a backcountry guide, and when I was talking with him about it, he's like, oh, that's like sometimes we'll like get to a river or a stream and we throw our boots over. So it's just like, well, I guess we have to move forward now because our boots are over there. We got to keep moving forward, and it's a way of tricking yourself to make progress.
So let's start at the beginning there. So you've had this idea. You're like, look, I'm going to do this trip. 4 weeks on the trail, big through hike. I've got a year ahead of me. Like in that situation, you hadn't done. Well, I assume you hadn't done anything like that before. Like, what were the things that you knew you needed to learn and change to get ready for this?
Yeah. So, you can do the math on a piece of paper, or you can Google, the many people who have done these type of hikes ahead of time. And I knew we were going to have to do about, 10 or so miles a day, in our time frame. And I wasn't moving 10 or so miles a day. Occasionally, maybe a weekend, go out and do, like I said, like a 5 mile day hike or something. So the very first thing I started to do was like, I just need to get my body used to moving as much as possible. And so, I was lucky enough that my work schedule, I could, I work from home a lot of times, and this was before COVID-19. And so a lot of meetings at different places. And I was just like, hey, if I don't need to be worried about getting too sweaty and stinky, and I can walk to a meeting, and I have enough time to do that, I'm just going to start doing that instead of getting in my car. or taking a ride share. And so the very first thing I started to do was just literally like walking everywhere I could, as much as I could. And I was amazed at how first how tired and sore, but two, how quickly I could literally feel like my body adjusting and changing and growing and getting stronger.
And then from there, what was the next step?
Yeah. So then, that was an easy sort of thing. It didn't require a lot of investment, so to speak. And so from there, I got a gym membership and started just to, again, sort of, I would walk to the gym and then I would jog or do some other, just basic cardio type of working out. And again, a lot of this was sort of self-guided, just sort of feeling where my excuse me a second. So a lot of this was sort of feeling my body and self-guided. Where can I push myself a little bit harder, a little bit more, and how can I add? Whether it's moving a little bit faster or a little bit longer. One thing that actually what I found really helpful and motivating was maybe this is because I'm a storyteller sort of as my job, and I like chronicling and collecting stories. I have too many hard drives full of random videos and audio and recorded conversations and stuff that'll never see the light of day. But I just started keeping track of what was going on. Part of with like the inciting incident falling, like forcing my own hand, part of me thought, oh, this might make an interesting story. This might make a podcast. Hint, hint, it did. And we can talk about that later. But I just started like keeping track of everything. So whether that was what I was eating, how much I was walking, how fast I was going, I've heard other people say measurement is motivation. So just if there's something you can sort of track and sort of see progress in, it's a great motivating tool, or a great motivating tool. And so it was just one of those things where it was almost like a game, like, oh, how far can I walk today? Or what's the, how many more hours can I spend, working out? Or, sometimes it maybe got a little bit too unhealthy with the sort of competition with myself. But I do think sort of tracking as much as it could with the way my brain works was super, super helpful.
And then on top of, so you've started off, walking everywhere you can, and then you've stepped up into the gym and you've started adding a few extra bits and pieces in there. What else went into the process over this time? Or
yeah, so I started. So because I had this idea of making a podcast out of it, I thought this was a great door into sort of talking to other people who had been there before me, who had done similar things, gone on similar journeys, or gotten similar sort of physical transformations. And one of them was this guy who ended up becoming my friend. His name's Donald, and he told me when he was out on a long through hike like this, he wasn't prepared for sort of some like the mental things that go on, the sort of what happens to your brain. He jokingly said, like, we don't have gyms for our brain. And maybe that's what therapy is. I don't know. But, it was a good reminder, because it was like, oh, I could spend all this time working on my strength, losing weight, trying to get in shape, whatever that is. But there's a completely other aspect to this journey that's going in. And, part of this story that definitely had an effect on this was while I was training to get in shape to do this hike, my mom actually passed away. And it obviously wasn't planned. That's not something you can plan for or want to see happening. And so I was dealing with a lot of these feelings of like grief and like some of the cliche sort of like, YOLO, you only live once, or bucket list type stuff. And I really was sort of had this feeling like there's some stuff going on inside me that I need to like focus and be aware of, that I don't necessarily want to push out, but I also don't want to let it like overwhelm me either. And since there was this podcast project, I reached out to this mindfulness therapist to just sort of talk about some of his experiences doing this stuff. And one thing I thought that he said was really interesting was like, to some people on the outside, hearing that you're going to go like spend a month in the woods, that can sound like you're retreating or you're running away. But actually, running away is not dealing with it. And the thing about putting yourself in a scenario where you're outdoors like that, with left with very little but your own thoughts, you're going to deal with this stuff. It's there's only so many distractions you can have when you're out in the backcountry. And he challenged me. He's just like, when you feel something, don't try to push it down. When you feel something start to come up, maybe it's a feeling of sadness or anger or frustration. Maybe you have a memory of your mom and it makes you miss her. Like, in that moment, sort of recognize it, acknowledge it, deal with it however you need to deal with it, and then sort of continue on. And this idea that I think became super beneficial, not just in the very practical sense, but as a metaphor of like, multiple things can happen at once. And for myself, I know a lot of times I can really want to try to like streamline and be efficient and sort of find the best way to do something. And that we don't always have that option, especially in the backcountry. You can only control what you can only control. And most of the things are out of our control. And so just being able to like be present, be in the moment, be aware of what's happening around you, and recognize what I can do in that very moment became like a really, really good tool that I was able to use on the hike. And I can talk about that a little bit too, but I don't know if you wanted to jump in there at all.
No, absolutely. Keep on going. It's such an interesting subject. So keep it going.
I don't want to talk too much. I even though I make podcasts for a living, I do get sick of hearing my own voice. So, as I'm sure you can relate to at times. So we had this experience when, in the first sort of week of hiking where I was really struggling at times, and we're up above 10,000 feet for a good chunk of it. And I wasn't sure how much of this was like the thin air. Was this elevation sickness? Did I happen to unluckily get a cold at the start of this, or was I just not prepared enough? And I was starting to feel all this stuff. And there was a moment where we were approaching Mount Whitney. We were traveling north up through the Sierras. And so for the JMT, that means like Whitney's the quote unquote start of the trail. And it's the tallest mountain in the contiguous United States. It's up at like 15,000 feet almost. And it's this really like iconic, again, bucket list moment. And we were faced with the choice of like, is this something that we do, or is this something that we skip? Like, does that make it still a through hike if we don't do the technical beginning of this trail? And ultimately we decided to bypass it. And it was one of these moments where, again, looking back on it, it seems like an obvious decision, but in the moment it was really tough. And it was really hard to be like, this is something I want. This is a moment I've dreamt of. I've seen so many people take pictures on top of the mountain and sort of, next to the sign or looking out over, the rest of California, and you can just see for miles and miles and miles. And it was sort of coming to terms with like, this doesn't have to be the story that I'm telling. This doesn't have to be the story that I'm experiencing. And in reality, like, I am still doing this hike. I still been on this amazing journey to get here, and I will continue on this amazing journey no matter what it looks like. and sort of feeling multiple things at once. I can be upset or disappointed that I wasn't able to do Mount Whitney, but I can also be happy that I'm out here, and I can be awe-inspired by the beauty that's all around me. And it's something that struck me was that the phrase like breathtaking. Like, I often use that, and I hear it often used to describe like wonderful, awe-inspiring moments. But it's also breathtaking is a terrifying thing when you think about it. Like, your breath is literally being taken from you. And so again, in sort of this mindfulness, being present, being aware, feeling multiple things at once, it's just a great reminder that it's okay to be disappointed and happy. It's okay to be sad that your parents, gone and you won't see them anymore, but also be excited and strangely have motivation from that horrific event to get in shape and sort of work on your own health journey. Is that tracking? I don't know. I know it's a bit esoteric and maybe up in the air there, but again, that feeling of like being able to process different emotions simultaneously was a huge sort of lesson that I learned during this whole thing.
Oh, absolutely. And it is such an interesting topic and such an important thing to talk about almost, because, I know for myself, like with my own clients who, are preparing for different adventures and that, like that's the thing where, as you said, dealing with different emotions at the same time, it comes up all the time. When things come up, whether it's on the trail or beforehand, and actually speaking through that and talking about that process and as you said, almost giving yourself permission. I think that's such a powerful thing. And I think I'm so glad you brought that up, because I never really heard it talked about like that or explained like that, but it makes perfect sense of something that is such an important thing.
Well, it's so interesting too, how sometimes these like, ethereal, emotional, whatever you want to categorize them, things, like we need experience in that world to then like reverse metaphorize. I don't know the terminology, but like become a reverse metaphor for like what we experience in nature and on the trail. And like, it's like if I didn't have this emotional, again, for lack of a better word, if I didn't have this emotional experience, like I wouldn't have learned about how to deal with multiple things at once on the trail. It's like the overused analogy of like, if you just get a little bit off trail, it doesn't feel like much in the beginning, but if you don't keep checking your surroundings, like you'll be miles off trail. And like, it almost took me an emotional experience of that for me to learn the truth of that in the physical world.
And then on this sort of mental and mindfulness side of things that, we've been talking about, is there anything else that you sort of, you went through or you used or you found the value of either in your preparations or, while you were actually on the trail that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I think there's one more sort of like big spiritual truth thing that's jumping out to me. And, I for this podcast, I spoke with Olympian and author Alexi Pappas, and she told me this story about training for a marathon, and she had this goal of like how fast she wanted to run it. And 8 miles in or so, she was like, "Oh, I'm not going to be able to do this." And the easy or the correct or not, let me take that back. It would have been understandable if she stopped there, just because the amount of time it takes to train to do a marathon and then the amount of time to recover afterwards. A lot of athletes, if they're unable to sort of hit their marks, they end early so they can do a retraining session and then just get back out there. But instead, she decided to just change her pace, change her expectations, change her goal, and sort of reframe her story. And she ended up finishing the race and was really proud of it. But the phrase she said was, you can't, if your goal is to become the best, you're probably going to fail every time. But what you can do, what you can be in control of, is being your best. Or she said it much more eloquently than that. But I think that's a huge reminder. It's just like, we often hear in the outdoor community, in the hiking community, like hike your own hike. And again, that can be an overused phrase, but it's just one of those truths that is overused and sounds easy to understand. But when you really stop and think about it and ponder it, it's a pretty remarkably strong and empowering concept to get behind.
And then, so let's talk about challenges and obstacles. So obviously we've just chat through, a couple of big things that you faced there. Was there anything else, like either in your preparations or while you were actually on this hike, which did come up and was a major challenge? And if so, like how did you go about overcoming it?
I think when it comes to training, I'm the type of person who would be like, oh, let me Google, let me hop online and find what sort of hikes are in the area that I can try. And they can often feel like some of them seemed like they would be too difficult for me, or I wasn't quite ready for them. And this is just a super simple a thing that helped me out. That's like, again, obvious, but I don't know, maybe someone out there who's listening, who's thinking about extending and getting into this sort of stuff may be helpful to them. You don't have to do 100% of the trail. Like if there's a really cool day hike sort of in your area and it feels like it's outside of your ability, just do the first half of it and then go back the next weekend and then add another mile and then go back the next weekend and then add 2 miles. I don't know if it's just me, but I'm the type of person I see, oh, there's a 12-mile trail. That means I have to do all 12 miles. Otherwise I can't hike it. And that's pretty limiting.
Yeah. I think that's a really, really good point, because I'm pretty much the same. I look at a trail and I'll be like, yep, I'm going to finish that. But, if it's something that kind of feels like outside of my reach at this level of fitness or whatever, yeah, it's sort of like, oh, I'm not going to do it. But I think that's a really, really good point there.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely fallen to that like completist camp, which it has its benefits and can be cool to sort of, like I said, check off things, but it can also get in the way and prevent you from trying or doing things that you feel might be outside of your ability.
And then, sort of to sum up your training before we start talking like the specifics of the trail, like to sum up your training, what do you think, all in all, was there anything that you reckon was the best type of training or the best exercises you did that, you just felt like would really, really definitely helped you on the trail? So anything you can sort of sum up there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it sounds easier than it actually was, but just walking as much as I could, as often as I could, as far as I could. Again, I was lucky enough to live in a town where if I had meetings or stuff like that, they were close enough. I think the furthest I walked to a meeting was 5 miles. And I had enough time to sort of do that, but just like really like put down the car. I don't know if you can put down the car. Just you don't need a car for everything. If something's a mile or two away, like it's, that's less than an hour's walk away. If you're buying groceries, again, a lot of this was pre-COVID times, so things might be a little different depending on where you live and where you're listening to this. But if you're going to get groceries once a week, you probably don't. For me, that's like 2 bags of groceries. So it's like challenge yourself to like walk to the grocery store, buy your groceries, and walk back. Maybe there's a closer grocery store than like the one you always go to. Try that out, meet new people. It's also like, side note, that's a great way to like explore your city or town and like discover new places. Like you'll be amazed at like, oh, I've never been down this street before. What's down here? And I've found some cool restaurants or other cool shops that way. But that's sort of a tangent benefit, I guess.
Yeah, I know a lot of people over this side of the world when a couple of our states went into a pretty harsh lockdown at certain points during COVID, and they were sort of restricted to just a 5-kilometer radius around their house for a while. But one of the really cool positives of that time was just all the things people were discovering in their local area, and had so many so many of the clients through Summit Strength who are doing load of pack walking or just walks like around their neighborhood. And every day they were like, I've discovered this or this cool house or this cool plant or something. So yeah, it's a funny thing, like how much sort of almost magic is, around your local area, but you just sort of never really see it.
Yeah. And then that becomes a great motivating tool to like get out and walk more again. So it's a cycle that sort of feeds itself.
Mm. And then talk to us about the trail then. So, how did it all go for you? What were the highlights? What were the lowlights? Like, yeah, tell us about it.
Yeah. So outside of the first, few days, which I was just talking about there, like approaching Mount Whitney and after, it sort of got easier with every day. Now, very practically, the route we were taking, like, the trail was getting easier every day. But I mean, it's so gorgeous. If I don't know if you've ever been able to hike in the Sierra Nevadas here in California before, or if any of your listeners has, but it's just, I mean, it's some of the most beautiful places I've ever seen. And then even getting this was my first time really getting up and spending an extended period of time up above tree line at times. And it feels like otherworldly, almost like, like an alien landscape at times, but it's also like eerily beautiful too. And, we had some hard moments at some of the high passes. It happened to be a pretty snowy year. And so there was still a lot of snow up at the high elevation. And I think we were a little underprepared for that, probably could have benefited from bringing some crampons or micro spikes or stuff like that. But yeah, I think, I would encourage anyone to hike more, if they already like it, to do more. And if they haven't yet, to just try it. But even the hardest times, like for me, like maybe it's hindsight, 2020 revisionist history type thing, but like looking back on some of the difficult moments, like I think there's not much I would change. Like it was an experience and a story and a journey that I'm proud of myself that I was able to do. It's one of these things where even though I'm telling the story, it's and like doing it as a podcast, it's like finding the words sometimes can be so not there, because it's just such a feeling and an experience that even the best words pale in comparison to the experience that you have out there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, all the listeners here, we're all hikers in one shape, form or another, and we can all definitely understand exactly what you're saying there. I think, we've all been there in one way or another.
But I do think, but I do think it is one of those things where it's just like, there's some real difficulties up there, like, and some stuff like I said, we were unprepared for, and it was hard and difficult. And so I definitely wish we learned more or had more practice or whatever, or had the right equipment. But at the same time, like, I would never want the fear of being in a situation like that to prevent me from trying, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then to wrap, tie everything together here, I guess, like if there was someone who was in a similar situation to this, so they might be a casual camper or a casual hiker, and, they've reached this point where they're like, you know what, I want to do this big adventure. I want to do this big challenge, whatever it may be. Like, what words of advice could you give them? Like, what do you think they should know?
Yeah. Well, first thing I would say is you can do it. Like, I truly think oftentimes we have this picture of like what a thru hiker or like an athlete is in our head. And very few of us actually live up to that standard. But the truth is, like, athletes and hikers come in all different shapes and sizes, and there may be certain things that are more difficult for you in a given time or a given body, but you can still do it. And so, like, try Try it, be safe, be smart, but try it. Like you can do it in no matter where you are, you can do some version of this. And then if you have the ability to, put a little bit of more time and effort and training, if you have the, physical wherewithal to do it, like start tracking something. It doesn't matter whether it's, the obvious things that some people talk about would be like track how many calories you eat or track your weight. And those have their pros and cons. And I'm not an expert. And so I don't want to recommend something there that might lead to negative, body issues or whatever, but find something that you can track, because seeing that progress is a huge motivator. So if it's miles walked in a day, a lot of people have the fitness trackers on their wrist, like how many steps can you just find one thing that you can track and then just try to add more and more and more every day. So those would be my sort of 2 pieces of advice.
Awesome. How good. No, this has been so great having you on, Andrew. I think this has been such an interesting episode, and we've sort of touched on a few points which, after all these episodes on the podcast, we've never really talked about before. And I really appreciate you coming on and chatting a little bit about your story. And I do think a lot of people are in a similar situation who are listening to this podcast. So I think a lot of people will resonate with a lot of what you said. So I really do appreciate you coming on. And I think, like, before we go, like, you have mentioned a couple of times, you've got your podcast that talks a little bit about your story. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? So what it's all about and where we can find it, and give us the details.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Yeah, no, it's a really, I think, fun storytelling thing. Trying to do my best version of a documentary style narrative podcast, but like I said, it's roughly it's the audio and interviews and trail diaries from a year of my life, sort of getting in shape and then actually getting out on the trail. And the show's called Trail Weight, and you can find more information at the website trailweight.co, or just searching Trail Weight wherever you get your podcasts. And hopefully it's an interesting story. But I'm really trying to not just highlight my own story, but also showcase other people's experiences, whether they're experts or Olympians, like I said, or whether they're authors, or whether they're people, sort of from my world of entertainment, again, for lack of a better phrase. That sounds so self-aggrandizing. But, what sort of lessons I can learn from my non-outdoor fields of interest that can be applied to the outdoors. So I think it's really fun. I'm really looking forward to sharing it with a lot of people. But if anybody would love to check that out, it's called Trail Weight, and the website is trailweight.co.
Awesome. I'll definitely leave a link for that in the show notes below. So if anyone wants to check that out, absolutely. And if anyone did want to sort of connect with you online, is there anywhere else they can find you?
Yeah, I'm on social media occasionally, at Andrew Steven on both Twitter and Instagram. That's AndrewSteven.
Easy. Cool. Well, I'll leave those links below as well. So anyone who's interested in hearing a bit more about Andrew's story and checking all that out, it'll all be down in the show notes below. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on today, Andrew. I think this has been a really interesting episode today, and I think there's been some really, really cool points that we talked through. So yeah, it's been awesome having you on. I really, really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Training for Trekking podcast. So if you've enjoyed this episode, please remember to subscribe, rate, and review us in iTunes. So thanks for getting involved, and we'll see you on the next one.